The empire, with its approximately 8 million people, a thriving economy, and a competent military, is one of the most powerful human nations in the region, and second only to the theocracy of Slayn in this regard. Its territory spans from the Great Forest of Top, the Silesian Mountains, and the Northern Sea in the west and east, to the Katz Plain in the south, and the city-state alliance of Karnassus and the Dragon Kingdom, and the lands of the Drakes and Wyvern Riders in the east and southeast. The borders and many other details on this map were, by the way, drawn by me and may not necessarily represent the actual boundaries because we simply don't know them yet. And the map included in Overlord's 9th volume actually does not show any national borders, and also lacked rivers and other military important information, likely because it's the same map that Einsulgon received from the Major of Iwantel, who noted that it was very hard to get a better one, due to wartime issues. And with that said, back to the Empire. The state is ruled as an absolute monarchy by Emperor Jerknith Rune Farlord El Nix, son of the former emperor, who allegedly came to power after his father was poisoned, likely by his very own mother, in order to put himself on the throne. And he managed to consolidate power, but after offering his nation as a vassal to avoid war and destruction, he now rules only internally and must obey directives from the Sorcerer Kingdom and especially from Albedo. And the empire, like many other states in the region, was founded around 200 years ago, after the 13 Heroes, a loose alliance of dozens of powerful beings, defeated the evil gods. And the 13 Heroes included, among others, Kino Fasris Inverun, the princess of the fallen kingdom of Invernia, destroyed by the Dragon Lord Cure Elim Los Malvoir, also known, and better known at that, as Evil Eye, Rigrid Berskaru, an immensely powerful necromancer, the legendary Black Knight who wielded the infamous Swords of Darkness, and one of which, Killenarium, is still in the possession of Lakius, the leader of the Blue Roses. And this is the former adventurer group of Rigrid Berskaru herself. And of course Platinum Dragonlord, as his armor, was among the many heroes, and also the Dwarf King and the former ruler of the Dwarven Kingdom as well. Also, and this is very interesting considering that Platinum was part of the alliance, an Yggdrasil player joined as well, and there were many other extremely powerful beings. However, their story has been heavily censored by the theocracy, and according to their own propaganda, which is very present in the Empire of Baharuth, only humans were among these heroes, something clearly refuted by the existence of Evil Eye, a vampire princess. And during this battle, they fought an epic, and I have to stress this again, an epic life and death struggle against the evil gods, likely over many decades. And now you might ask, who are the evil gods anyway? Well, they were destructive beings led by a demonic overlord, a demon king, about whom little is known, except that he was ultimately defeated, and that many of the allies that he had were not necessarily slain, but just sealed or banished, and the war led to a massive loss of human life, and a widespread destruction of entire nations. And therefore, the empire was founded 200 years ago, among other states. And shortly after its founding, the empire recruited the powerful magic caster Fluder Paradane as a court wizard, because like Rigid Berskaru, Fluder had extended his own life unnaturally through a ritual, and therefore lived on for centuries, serving under multiple emperors, and basically becoming a pillar on which the empire stand, a pillar that stabilized the oftentimes shifting nation throughout the course of centuries. And although his relationship with the first emperor was strained, to put it mildly, that emperor still recognized Fluder Paradane's strategic importance and his power, and therefore bound him to the empire with this lucrative offer. And this foresight paid off. Fluder single-handedly saved the empire from numerous disasters over the course of centuries, and was instrumental in its growth. He also served as a mentor to young emperors, including Jerknith, whom he ultimately betrayed to study magic under Rhine Sulgon, something that has fascinated him since childhood. And therefore the Empire prospered due to Fluda's support and guidance and the more or less visionary leadership of its emperors, or at least its competent leadership. And very importantly, they not lost themselves in rivalries, but they built upon each other's policies and legacies. And the Empire also remained strong in the frontier zone of human settlement simply because it had to, since any internal weakness simply could not be afforded due to the constant threats from the Forest of Top, the giants and the dragons and all of the other monsters of Asalesia, and many enemies that also threaten the city-state alliance of Carnasus. And recently, the Dragon Kingdom, which is currently invaded by the Beastman nation, and it is basically hunted, or rather the humans in it are hunted for their meat. So again, it is a very dangerous neighborhood, and therefore the Empire needed to stay strong. But with that said, not all policies towards non-human nations were hostile, and they were not seen as universal enemies. On the contrary, the Empire does engage in trade with the Minotaur Kingdom, which was supposedly founded by a human Yggdrasil player, a Minotaur. And he also introduced modern technologies, like fans or refrigerators, though he didn't know how to build them, just that they needed to be built, earning himself the title of All-Talk Sage. But like nobody said this ever to his face. And the expanding trade routes and the pragmatic diplomacy defined the following years. Still, succession crisis and power struggle did occur, but they were manageable, because again, Fluda could always stabilize the nation, and he was immensely powerful. And so we arrive at the current date, and it is suspected that Jerknith's mother, several years before the main plot of Overlord happened, eliminated his own father to place her young son on the throne. Jerknith, however, used his newfound position and power to not only eliminate rivals to the power of his family, but also rivals to his own power, including his own mother, and he also began military reforms. But he, during all of this process, declared war on the neighboring kingdom of Riestais. I mean, this is a classic, having a lot of instability at home and a lot of political struggle at home, so of course, a war is declared. And therefore, nobles, eager for glory, rushed into battle in order to use their newfound gravitas and their newfound successes to perhaps change and shift the balance of power to their own favor, only to be crushed by the elite pikemen and the deep-standing ranks of spear infantry of the kingdom. Though suffering a military defeat, the losses among the nobility were a political victory for Jerknith. This allowed him to blame and execute the weakened nobles, who again lost their own military, and therefore take direct control of the military of the state, the military and the troops of the Baharuth Empire, which also blamed the nobles for the loss of their fellow men and soldiers. And with his power now secured against all internal enemies, because none of them remained alive, the military was streamlined and professionalized, forming a standing army of 80,000 men, divided into 8 legions of 10,000 each, supported by air power and a powerful magic user base. And the following wars against Riestais were more like skirmishes, designed to weaken the Riestais kingdom internally, because the army's mobilization led to failed harvests, which crippled their economy, while the empire's own economy began to flourish due to a merit-based administration where public offices were taken from the nobility and given to actually competent people, and the magical academy founded by Fluda, which again is a theme that reached through the centuries, and the magical academy founded by Fluda Paradane, which had a high output of actually competent casters, which greatly benefited the Empire of Baharuth throughout these centuries. So magic education became a tradition, which it very much wasn't in the Kingdom of Rhea's ties by comparison. And this not only increased the economy, but also the internal security, even reducing the influence of the theocracies, or rather the adventurer guild founded by the slain theocracy after the war against the evil deities. And to further secure the goodwill of the public, Jerknif also hosted lavish tournaments in Aventar. And of course this newly formed strategy of Emperor Jerknif to not engage the enemy in open combat, but just waiting and watching, as he spends his own energy on basically mobilizing year after year, also was a welcome change from the bloody first annual war. And therefore, Jerknif also gained, slowly but surely, not only the economic, but also the military high ground, so to speak. And to further secure the goodwill of the public, Jerknif also hosted lavish tournaments in Aventar, in the Imperial Amphitheater, to boost morale, and he was often praised himself by the crowd. However, this was also the place where Jerknif was completely defeated in the political arena by the Undead King. He was lured to Nazarick, entered an alliance with the rising Sorcerer Kingdom, only to be intimidated by its overwhelming power, and to lose military support at the Battle of the Cuts Plain, which marked the end, and the final annual war. And when Einsulgon then defeated Gorjin, the strongest warrior the amphitheater had seen in a long time, without even using magic, defeating a war troll, in front of all of the people. After already shattering the forming alliance with the theocracy of Slain, Jerknif was politically checkmated and submitted himself and the Empire to the Sorcerer King. And the Empire then became part of Nazarick's sphere of influence, and its military was halved to just 40,000 living men. It was further professionalized and augmented by undead soldiers in order to free up additional labor. And its economy was also further strengthened by undead labor, the economic recovery of the Sorcerer Kingdom and later the Holy Kingdom, and the renewed trade with the Dwarf Kingdom, and generally way better internal security. And its economy was also further strengthened by the undead labor provided by the Sorcerer Kingdom, the economic recovery of the Sorcerer Kingdom, and renewed trade with a long-lost old ally, the Dwarf Kingdom. So despite Jerknif losing his political independence, he still immensely profited from the general situation and the mighty Sorcerer Kingdom of Einsulgon, and he even made a friend. Lakius is not only the leader of the Blue Roses, one of only 3 Adamantide-ranked adventurer teams, but she's also, through various connections, both likely and unlikely, acquainted or even related to many powerful beings, such as, albeit very indirectly, to Platinum Dragonlord. But first things first, Lakius leads the same adventurer team that originally included Rigrid Bears-Carew, one of the 13 heroes, who had retired from active adventuring decades ago due to old age. And that suggests this adventurer team has existed since the very beginning of the Adventurers Guild, which itself was only established after the 13 heroes defeated the evil deities over 200 years ago. And to make up for this loss of one of the legendary 13 heroes after Rigrid's retirement, the old retiring adventurers made a bet with Evil Eye. And again, what Evil Eye was supposed to gain from all of this, we don't know. But both sides agreed that if Evil Eye lost the upcoming fight against Rigrid, she would join the Blue Roses in her stead. And she lost. And so it was ensured that this team still had a powerful arcane caster among their own ranks. And it was also likely very important to Rigrid Bears-Carew that someone who had personally fought against the evil deities and witnessed the devastation that they had caused firsthand remained a part of the team, because this would keep the group focused on true threats and prevent them from losing sight of their mission by slipping into a life of luxury and thus neglecting their responsibilities. And this brings us to Lakius' uncle, Azud Aindra. He too is a powerful noble, and leads the kingdom's second adamantite ranked adventurer team, at least until the emergence of Momon and Nabe. And he also is the pilot of the Armor of Reinforcement, a red suit of armor that allows him to effortlessly destroy a dozen Death Knights by using Chain Dragon Lightning. In other words, this armor grants him tremendous power, putting him on par with or at least near the level of the slain Theocracy's godkins or the Pleiades battlemates. However, he became exactly the kind of idle, carefree and very, very lust-driven person Ygritte likely wouldn't want in her own team. Usroot was known more as a womanizer than as a warrior, and he never trained seriously for battle or for anything else. And he relied so heavily on his own armor that all of his skills were focused solely on piloting it. And he grew basically very, very overconfident, or rather just lazy and very indifferent at times. And therefore he failed to reach his own true potential. I mean, for comparison, even Brain Angnaus could at least cook. And with such a powerful artifact from Yggdrasil online, it would have been easy for Usroot to say, seriously disrupt, or even stop the invasion of the Dragon Kingdom by the demi-humans. I mean, just imagine a single Death Knight. This would be a catastrophic threat for any nation other than the Theocracy of Slain. I mean, the Empire only survived the emergence of another Death Knight of the Cuts plane by carpet bombing it from above. And again, Usroot was able to take out a dozen of them with just a single spell of his armor. And therefore he would have been extremely important in any theater of war that humanity was currently facing. But again, he chose to womanize and to live a life of laziness and luxury. And that's why Platinum Dragonlord constantly planned to take the armor from Usroot, by taking his life, and to hand it to someone more worthy of defending the world, more committed, more focused, a man of sheer will. Still, Usroot's lazy lifestyle did have one good consequence. It inspired Lakius to become an adventurer herself. And she is disciplined, responsible, and dedicated to her role. And she's also incorruptible. And to her, her uncle's life was a warning, a cautionary tale of sorts. Nevertheless, the fact that the two leaders of the most powerful adventurer teams were related gave their family tremendous influence, at least potentially. And Lakius also considered herself close friends with Renna. And the Golden Princess was basically such an important figure for herself that she was willing and, without Evil Eye's intervention, would have actually gone down with her alongside her own failing kingdom, at least in her own mind. She didn't know about Renna's plot and her connection to Nazarick, of course. So again, Lakius had not only connections to the royal family, but also to the most brilliant politician within it, in addition to being a powerful noble herself. And the reason Lakius is still alive today is thanks to Evil Eye and her own intervention. And the undead vampire princess forced her and the remaining Blue Roses, or rather forced her together with the remaining Blue Roses, to flee from Ain Sulgon's troops, presumably to her old homeland, the lost kingdom of Invernia. And as one of the 13 heroes, and as a potential immortal vampire princess, and as a Rainbow Eye, a humanoid naturally gifted in arcane magic, Evil Eyes had power capable of conquering entire nations. And again, she and Lakius were truly close friends, and they had, normally at least, a deep mutual respect for one another. And Evil Eye at least considered her important enough to basically abduct her, in order to ensure that she won't go down with Renna and her kingdom. And this brings us to the rest of the Blue Roses. The team was not only internally loyal to each other, but also included Gargeran, a powerful warrior, and with Tia and Tia, extremely powerful and skilled assassins. And both of them held special value thanks to their ability to strike from the shadows. Especially in the current political situation in the kingdom, prior to Einsulgon's invasion. And Lakius was also a deeply religious person, though she was critical of the high prices charged by the temples for healing magic. Fees they set to remain politically independent by basically selling healing magic to the masses at their own exorbitant prices. And under different circumstances, she might have become a reformer, especially given her noble status and her ties to Renna. A sort of moderate reformer, not as radical as, let's say, Nea Baraya. And additionally, Rigid Beskaru passed on a wild magic ring to Gazev Stronov, and this means Lakius was, at least indirectly connected to Gazev, the most powerful warrior in the Kingdom of Riestais and the captain of the most powerful conventional warrior troop, the Royal Warriors of King Ramposa. And finally, Lakius also wields a powerful artifact, Killenarium, one of the legendary Swords of Darkness. The legendary swords, which the Black Knight carried over 200 years ago into battle in order to protect humanity from otherwise certain extinction. Which, of course, is a truly massive boost to her own status and her own powers. So in summary, Lakius had immense potential influence through her own network of connections, and she was yet very young, and could, over the course of decades, learn to wield this influence and this power to the advantage of the kingdom and to the common people. But Einsulgon appeared, and then Philip had a brilliant idea that ruined everything for the Kingdom of Riestais. But without any of this, Lakius might have played a role similar to Zanek, Marquis Raven, or Nea, a great figure in the kingdom's own history, but it was simply not meant to be. First and foremost, it must be said that there are many reasons for the masked appearance of characters in Overlord, the most obvious one being that masks hide the face and provide anonymity, and in a medieval fantasy world without the internet or telecommunication, where you have to rely on accounts from a handful of people on the ground, people who might misremember certain things, anything that hides your true identity is so much more effective. And this concealment is already the first reason for why so many characters in Overlord are actually wearing masks. The Pleiades battlemates, Demiurge, and others were instructed by Albedo to disguise themselves. And Demiurge in particular played the role of the demon Emperor Yaldabaoth, and was indispensable in Nazarick's diplomatic and political landscape. So camouflage was necessary to avoid being associated with both identities simultaneously. And it seems to have worked. Demiurge, dressed in his pinstripe suit and mask, appeared extremely alien to the new world, where such type of clothing are not widely known. And in a world where the most powerful magical artifacts often come from Yggdrasil or Nine, and often look quite exotic, such disguises take on a mystical arcane character, in addition to hiding their role and their hidden identities rather well. And this foundation was expanded upon in the movie and the Holy Kingdom arc in the books. The disguises were only half-hearted, making it a matter of time before the identities of the persons beneath them were revealed. And they also stemmed from a time when Nazarick had to remain hidden while gathering information about the new world. Later, Einsulgon revealed that these demonic maids, the ones Yaldabaoth used during the incursion into Irantel's capital, were just being controlled by the mask that they are wearing. And this being a magical affair also made it quite believable that the Sorcerer King himself would descend into the Holy Kingdom. Next on, we move to Momon, the human adventurer, whose face is conveniently hidden behind thick plate armor. Ein's took on a human disguise, because being an undead overlord and such, he couldn't just reveal himself after the shock Henry experienced just based on his own appearance. And he only did so later on the battlefield after already showing his considerable power. To infiltrate human society together with Naber al-Gamma, he had to hide his identity beneath his helmet, and he also wore a second mask, a rubbery looking rather than a inhumane one. and over that rubber mask, Ainz casted an illusion spell, but since he could only use low-level illusion magic, he didn't want to risk being discovered, and that's why he almost never removed his helmet and tried during the rare moments that his face was actually shown to quickly cover it up again. And the inhabitants of the New World, especially the Swords of Darkness, had another interpretation of Ainz Ulgon's illusionary face, which might have seemed like that of a seasoned warrior to us, but to them it appeared to be ugly and deformed. So Ainz Ulgon, or rather Momon, was rather shy about his face and his looks, for lack of a better term. And of course some even wondered what Nabe could possibly see in him. Which, of course, the logical answer from their point of view was pure strength and power. And this masking also allowed Pandora's actor, a greater doppelganger with a face mask face, to later take over the role as Momon the Adventurer. And this brings us to another layer, the meaning of masks in theater. In theater, masks serve to create a distance between actor and the role that is played on stage, turning characters into character archetypes. And this also has a spiritual meaning. In Naruto, for example, the Anbu elite unit also wears masks, for anonymity's sake of course, in order to protect their family and their loved ones and their personal ties, and of course make them less susceptible to blackmail, and of course to create separation between their shinobi roles and all of the cruelties and careless acts that they have to commit in them and their own private and personal worldview and being. And also masks often signify supernatural beings, and nearly all characters who wear masks in Overlord are either supernatural beings or closely tied to them. This leads to the third point, the magical significance of masks. All masked characters in Overlord possess a magical or spiritual side. Ainz and Evil Eye are casters who want to hide their undead nature. Demiurge acted as a demon emperor. The Pleiades battlemates were allegedly controlled supernaturally. And of course they are battlemates. Much like how Sauron's one wing could influence the other wings and their bearers, the masks were said to influence and control them. And even Nea, who wears a kind of visor and is known as a blind evangelist, is spiritually and mystically aligned as a devoted preacher for Ainz Ulgon with the supernatural. Not at least, of course, because Ainz resurrected her. And let's take a closer look at Ainz and Evil Eye. Evil Eye, of course, couldn't show her face even at court for several reasons. First and foremost, she was one of the legendary 13 heroes who defeated the evil gods 200 years ago. And therefore, as an undead who hasn't aged a day since then, she could be identified by scholars through old records. And second of all, she of course was a vampire. And she was blamed for the fall of her homeland in Vernia, though in truth it was actually Cure Elim Los Malvar who was responsible for its destruction. And even if she were accepted as an undead at court, something very, very unlikely due to the powerful influence of religion in the world of Overlord and of the temples, she still wouldn't be accepted as a human undead, but rather she would still be seen as a humanoid undead called a Rainbow Eye. So she would be even more alien than even a normal undead would be. So in short, the political irritation caused by a high-ranking adventurer who doesn't show her face at court is one thing, and it is not a pleasant one, or a widely accepted or approved one. But since Evil Eye is a friend of Princess Renna, a trusted ally and team member of Lakius, the leader of the Blue Roses, one of formerly two adamantite-ranked adventurer teams, and because she is a very, very powerful caster, this was mostly overlooked and chalked up to eccentricity among magic users. Still, due to her small stature, rumors persisted that Evil Eye wasn't a human, which was true, but at least deniable, and that helped avoid political scandals and persecution. Additionally, the mask protected Evil Eye's face from sunlight, something harmful to vampires even in the Overlord world. And Ainz even had a practical excuse once for also wearing a mask and not taking it off. When Gazev Stronov, the leader of the Royal Guard, the head warrior of the king himself, dismounted to thank him, a commoner, from his own perspective, for saving the village Karen. Ainz would have had to return the gesture and remove his mask, but instead he pointed to the Death Knight beside him, whom Gazev Stronov as a seasoned warrior instantly recognized as an extremely powerful and dangerous undead. And because Ainz then hinted that removing his mask would cause him to lose control, Gazev Stronov declined and understood why Ainz couldn't show his face. And given the fact that Gazev had already expressed concern for the villagers by the way he acted and behaved, and thanked him, Ainz could cleverly justify keeping his mask on by appealing to Gazev's sense of duty towards his own people. So to summarize, in Overlord, masks serve not just symbolic roles as signs of supernatural or as a meaning of creating distance between person and a role that they are playing. They also carry spiritual and arcane significance. And of course, on a basic level, they help non-human characters blend into human society. And this, in and of itself, is symbolic of the Japanese concept of tatamae, the social mask one wears to maintain harmony in society, and hone, one's true inner feelings, which are kept private and only shared with a inner circle of trusted friends and family members. It's basically the public face shown to society symbolized by the mask, and the true face behind it that might be much different. And this duality is especially important for characters like Evil Eye and Ainz. Evil Eye cannot reveal her true identity as a vampire princess, while Ainz, though he can present himself as an undead overlord, must hide his true emotions behind an unmoving face to play the role as a brilliant ruler. So Japanese symbolism plays a very great role here, and one could almost say that Ainz Ulgon's entire body and his attitude as a ruler is a mask that is socially acceptable, and another reason why he can't show his true feelings in order to preserve harmony in the great tomb of Nazarick. And I believe that this professional facade, a reoccurring theme in Overlord, reflects not just tatamae and hone, but also the professional facade that Overlord's author, Maruyama-sama, must maintain in his work life. Behind it lies his personal nerdy interest. Interests such as Dungeons and Dragons and the many sessions he undoubtedly had with his friends, and the anime series Overlord that sprang from it. And ultimately, Ainz lost his friends because they no longer had time, with work and family and all, in order to play Dungeons and Dragons together with the author of Overlord, Maruyama-sama. So there's also likely a personal interest reflected in Ainz Ulgon's behavior and in the many masks that are appearing in Overlord. And with that said, you have basically seen the most uncontroversial mask video on YouTube. Ainz Ulgon is about to launch a full-scale attack on the slain theocracy, mobilizing the entirety of Nazarick's Great Tomb for the effort. And the theocracy's survival looks extremely unlikely, to put it mildly, especially now that no one remains who can wield the world-class item Downfall of Castle and Country. Sure, it's possible that Zashi is distantly related to one of the players from Nazarick, perhaps sparing her and even slain from the absolute worst that Nazarick has to offer due to this connection, but I believe the real point is how Platinum Dragonlord and the other dragons will respond to this overt attack. Platinum has already intervened once in the Riesta's kingdom, trying to ambush Ainz Ulgon and off him when the opportunity arose. In other words, we might see a much more powerful retaliation this time. And Platinum himself, as in his real body, could appear, alongside Deep Darkness Dragonlord Cure Elim Los Malvar and the Dragon Councillors of Arkland. And this could lead to an apocalyptic battle not seen since the end of the War of the Eight Great Kings, the Civil War that is. Or the theocracy could just be wiped out and then become the Cuts Plane 2.0, and Ainz would be done with it. But what I want to focus on is, however, something entirely different, namely what will happen to the Elf Kingdom, which was recently conquered by Slain. During Ainz's attempt to capture King Dakem Hugin, he encountered Zashi Zetsuma instead and took her back to Nazarick, instead of the king who perished under her boots. But During all of this, the entire city, the capital city of the entirety of the Elven Kingdom, and the only city that was so well defended that predators weren't a threat anymore there, was already under siege, and there was a wide path carved through the entirety of the elf forest. So it stands to reason that the entirety of the Elf Kingdom has fallen, and that basically it's now just about controlling all of the remote villages and root out any resistance. So the question then is, when, not if, when the theocracy is defeated, what will Ainz do with the rest of the Elf Kingdom now that their king, who ruled for centuries, is dead, their capital has fallen, and even his strongest daughter Zeshi Zetsumai is in Nazarick's custody? As mentioned in previous videos, Ainz not only had a good time in the Dark Elf village, but he also saw a great opportunity there, allowing Aura and Maru to play and interact with peers their own age. In other words, although Ainz's hatred and disgust for the theocracy came out so strongly that even Albedo thought her secret plan had been discovered just from the tone of his voice, he likely views the Elf Kingdom more positively, especially because of Aura and Maru. The current geopolitical situation is also in his favor. If the elves, currently suffering under Slane's rule, were to accept Ainz as their liberator, it would be the classical example of carrot and stick: destroy the theocracy that brainwashed Sheltier, and in return rebuild the damaged Elf Kingdom that had given Ainz Ulgon a very nice time during his holiday. And there's another good reason to think that the Elf Kingdom will be integrated instead of destroyed: the Great Forest of Top. This region, which surrounds the southern tip of Arcelesia and its mountain chain, was pacified over the course of 5 volumes, and its last resistance, Gru and Riarius, were dealt with by Volume 8, which takes place before Volume 7, chronologically speaking. And Aura played a key role in this as a ranger who knew the forest well, and even knowing in Volume 2 already where Muske was located. So I believe the Great Forest of Top could serve as a model for what the much greater Forest of Ivasha might eventually become, if the Sorcerer Kingdom formally annexes the area. The first step would be to explore and map the forest, its northern, southern, eastern and western extents, and key regions of special interest would also be scouted especially thoroughly, similar to how the Lizardmen and the Frogmen were found near the lakes at the foot of the Isilesian mountains. And the lake near the elf capital could also hold many such surprises. And the forest is probably bordered by a mountain range as well, beyond which lies a vast desert, home to the capital of the 8 Great Kings. And once the forest is fully mapped, it would be pacified, the beasts eliminated, and the scattered settlement offered a deal they can't refuse: join or be destroyed. Just like the Great Forest of Top went from being a green hell to a relatively safe zone, by New World standards, the dangerous Forest of Ivasha, with all of its beasts, could become just as safe under Nazarick's rule. And this would not only greatly benefit the Wood and Dark Elves, but also all of the other species living in the forest, be they dwarves in their mountainous caves, lizardmen living across the lake, or heteromorphic beings like Trans. Economically and socially, it would strengthen the inter-village ties, because previously villages were more or less isolated. They were islands, tiny spots in a vast green ocean, teeming with dangers. And also they needed pretty large hunting grounds. And of course, too many elves on a single place would invite predators. But under a unified kingdom, all of these conditions would change, and trade and social cohesion and coordination would improve immensely. In other words, the kingdom would become much easier to govern, and with easier resource extractions and safe travel on top, the economy would grow rapidly. And a newly freed and rebuilt elf kingdom would also be a fresh market for the flourishing economy of the Sorcerer Kingdom and its many products. For example, runecraft items and weapons. And then we arrive at the question, what is the political fundament on which this state will be built? Well, we've read time and time again that heterochromia, meaning having two different eye colors, is seen as a mark of royal blood in the Elf Kingdom, and possibly as a divine right to rule. We don't know if this is true or just propaganda by the late King Decamhugan to justify his rule, but the three elves from Ariel Usroot seem to believe it. And that means Aura and Mare, who also have heterochromia, could formally claim the throne. And in practice they might delegate rule to the three elves serving them, or act as figureheads, while the administration, headed by Albedo and co., run things day to day, just like it does in the rest of the Sorcerer Kingdom. And another possible ruler would be Zeshi Zetsumai, because if Antilene Heran Fosh, Zeshi's real name, really is distantly related to Yamaiko's sister, a guild member from Nazarick, then she may not only survive captivity, but also might be allowed to rule the Elf Kingdom as a vassal in Einsolgun's name. Because Zeshi also has heterochromia, black and white eyes that is, fulfilling the same foreshadowing of royalty and a claim to a elven kingdom's throne. And she could then reconnect with her elven heritage and form stable relationships with beings who age, like her, and not just age very fast and then perish, just like the humans from her own childhood. So in short, with the occupation of the theocracy and the loss of its leader, I believe that the Elf Kingdom is currently at rock bottom, and that it will recover under Einsolgun's rule, likely through a puppet monarch. And of course, other systems like a democracy are also possible, where a council governs, and the former kingdom acts more as an allied state, like the Dwarf Kingdom, rather than as a direct vassal. But again, the strong theme of heterochromia, suggesting monarchy, is the most likely direction. Pandora's actor, son of and also the only known personal NPC of Einsolgun inside the Great Tomb of Nazarick, and the treasurer of the tomb, is an incredibly powerful being. He essentially embodies the might and strength of Nazarick during its golden age. Pandora's actor, being a greater doppelganger, has the ability to imitate all, and I truly mean all members of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the 41 players, and this means he can replicate every single character class, every stat, and every synergy effect that these often min-maxed avatars had developed over the course of 12 years. 12 years of being a member of one of the most infamous player killer guilds in the entirety of the game Yggdrasil Online. And these powers are all available for this formidable entity. And that's not all. Theoretically, with Einsolgun's permission, Pandora's actor could gain access to the inventory of Einsolgun's old friends. He is intimately familiar with every single powerful weapon, every piece of armor, and every single legendary artifact in the deepest halls of the Treasury Vault. And perhaps he could even recombine and improve upon the power of the friends of his father. And he also has a profound understanding of the abilities and how they were used, and is a greater doppelganger capable of embodying up to 45 different individuals in depth. He not only has a reserve of 4 persons, truly unknown and not named today, but he can also imitate every single member of Nazarick in depth, meaning he can fight like Touch Me, Ulbert Elaine Oddle, or Tabudas Magdina, and naturally therefore he can always select and embody whichever player would be the most effective against a particular opponent. For example, if the enemy is weak to magic, he becomes Tabudas Maragdina. If the opponent is vulnerable in close combat, he becomes Touch Me or Warrior Takemi Kazushi. If the enemy has glowing red weak spots, he becomes Shinji, and if the enemy is weak against undead legions, he embodies his own father and unleashes undead hordes to overwhelm the foe. Now something else must be addressed that makes Pandora's actor more efficient than, let's say, Sheltier, because Pandora's actor alongside Albedo and Demiurge is one of the most intelligent beings in the world of Overlord, and of course inside of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. Eternally loyal to Ainz, he could also play a key role in foiling or at least uncovering Albedo's secret plan. and this sharp mind and quick perception allows him to swiftly analyze opponents and adapt his strategy in real time. Pandora's actor is not only theoretically capable of fighting the enemy as the most effective player for the situation, he can also pragmatically adapt his strategy and is deeply familiar with the gear and abilities of every single one of Nazarick's players. Which raises one question. Why was Pandora's actor also incredibly ineffective in the fight against Platinum Dragonlord's armor? Why did it seem like he could do nothing against him and had to be rescued at the last moment? Now, first and foremost, all of this is true, he lost the battle. For example, even in melee combat, the staff of Pandora was completely outclassed by Platinum's own powerful weapons. And he also seemed to lack the power of the spells that the armor of Platinum wielded. However, he did manage to cover one of the undead's key weaknesses. He tricked Platinum into thinking he couldn't be hurt by blunt weapons, which made the battle against the dragon armor easier than it otherwise would have been. Still, in close combat, Pandora would be completely outmatched. And even when it came to magic, Ein's doppelganger appeared to fall short. Spells like Grasp Heart failed, and while elemental magic like Call Greater Thunder had hit and dealt damage, it had little to no real effect on Platinum's armor, who just powered through. And even Pandora's summons were apparently weak. Both the elemental Skull and the Doomlord were unable to defeat Platinum, despite the fact that the armor didn't represent Platinum's full strength and capabilities. Which again is strange, because Pandora's actor is a level 100 being, and the armor had lost to Shell tier. As for the most successful counterattack in the entire fight, the Doomlord only managed to corner Platinum by recklessly sacrificing its own health in a berserker frenzy, and vanished soon after. But these described weakness were not a sign of Platinum's strength or Pandora's actor's actual weakness, rather they were part of a calculated and devious plan. Pandora's actor was meant to feign weakness, to make it appear as though he was barely surviving and unable to break through Platinum's world-separating barrier. The entire battle was never meant to end with Pandora's actor's victory. First of all, Pandora was given Ein's weaker reserve gear. His equipment wasn't up to the standards of the other floor guardians, or Ein's himself. That means, for instance, that his robe couldn't provide 100% fire resistance, like Ein's Ulgon's original item could, and the general stats and bonuses it granted were also way weaker. Additionally, Pandora's actor loses 20% of his combat strength due to penalties applied to selected stats. Every single stat that is variable is affected by this. So if he turns into Ulbert or Ein's Ulgon, he is only 20% weaker than them, which is still a lot of power, but he can't match the strength of the original 1-to-1. But with that said, Pandora's actor wasn't that weak. He again was meant to feign weakness, to deceive Platinum, in order to feed him false information about Ein's Ulgon's true strength. Because a rematch was planned from the very beginning, and it should therefore be made easier. And of course, Pandora's actor had to pretend to be Ein's Ulgon, so he was unable to transform into Ulbert or Touch Me. Again, both being extremely powerful combatants. Moreover, Pandora's actor was explicitly instructed by Ein's Ulgon to hold back, to bait the enemy and to extract information instead of fighting for the kill. And again, this was successfully achieved by kneeling, and by begging for his unlife, Pandora's actor actually got Platinum's armor to talk. And Platinum also thought that if he uses his real body, he could easily defeat the Sorcerer King. In other words, the second fight will likely be much more intense. And in regards to the undead, Pandora's actor was explicitly forbidden by Ein's to buff or enhance them in any way. The goal was to get a pure, unmodified read of what 2 level 70 undead beings could accomplish using only their inherent abilities against Platinum. Pandora didn't participate in the Doomlord's battle either, but he observed Platinum's combat behavior carefully, and he noticed that a Doomlord, who sacrifices his own HP to increase its damage output, could at least pressure the armor and keep it occupied and actually at a disadvantage. Likewise, the Elemental Skull spell were used not for damage. Okay, they did damage, but this was never the goal. But for experimentation. They were meant to test which one of the many spells that the Elemental Skull knew would be effective, without further draining Pandora's own limited mana pool, at least compared to Ainsulgon's. For instance, Call Greater Thunder was tested to see what would work effectively. But then, when Pandora's actor realized that elemental magic worked, he went via this Elemental Skull through all of the different elemental magic systems and the different elemental magic spells in order to further gauge the broad resistances and weaknesses of the armor. And the dark energy emitted by the Doomlord and the failed grasp part, which didn't even cause the armor to pause and flinch, as it usually would when casted by Ainsulgon against a living target, also confirmed that this thing was not alive. Not any more alive than either of the floating weapons around it. That it was not the real body of his true enemy. Instead, it was some kind of construct, something like a golem or a puppet. And that's why Grasp Part had no effect. And why the Doomlord's dark energy could do nothing against him. And multiple iterations of the same attack type, in this case negative energy, which harms the living but not constructs, along with Grasp Part and its repeated failure, serve to confirm this suspicion. Because again, Pandora had to consider the possibility of being deceived himself, just as he was trying to deceive Platinum. And that's why redundancy in attack strategies and the 4-eye principle, basically double-checking via Ainsulgon watching, were crucial in gathering reliable information. And throughout the entire fight, Pandora's actor fought with the brakes on, deliberately faking weakness to draw out the enemy and learn his capabilities of him. So the question then is, what would the fight have looked like if Pandora's actor had fought seriously? Well, he would have initially tried to use defensive magic to mislead Platinum, just like he did in the actual fight. However, in this hypothetical scenario, Pandora's actor, while waiting to be ambushed, would have buffed himself, just like Ainsulgon did before his own battle against Sheltier. And after confirming Platinum's true nature, first through Grasp Part, then via the Doomlord, Pandora's actor would have summoned more undead, from mid-tier undeads like the Death Knights or the Soul Eaters, which could stall Platinum for brief amounts of time, up to more powerful beings, like a Death Emperor or a Grim Reaper Thanatos. And naturally these undead would also have been buffed, because Ainsulgon and therefore Pandora's actor is capable of massively enhancing the power of his undead summons. I mean, just look at the Guva 41, who received an enormous stat boost to see the effects that this would have on the undead summons. And since Platinum's armor had no magic like Greater Rejection, which previously made it impossible for Sheltier to summon a Doomlord in the battle against Ainsulgon, Platinum would be on the defense. And in this case, Pandora's actor would not just stand by, but actively engage in the fight. After exhausting nearly all of his mana and using up his undead, either Platinum's armor would break down, or Pandora would go into melee combat, using Perfect Warrior in order to finish him off. And if a level 70 Doomlord could already put pressure on Platinum's armor, then an already weakened armor would not stand a chance against a level 100 warrior, even if said warrior was only of average strength and handicapped in some areas. So in other words, Pandora's actor would have won the fight against the armor, even while still impersonating Ainsulgon. The only reason he lost was because the first fight was solely for information gathering and for deceiving Platinum. Besides the fact that Ariel Usroot brought the elves to use them, among other things, as his personal harem and as canaries, that is to send them ahead in case of traps or danger, so they'd trigger them or get attacked by monsters instead of him, the 3 elves have different abilities and classes, meaning each of them has a different field of expertise. And although it wasn't explicitly shown which attacks, spells or magic abilities the elves have, and their role in the anime is rather minor, we can still deduce a lot about the 3 elves based on their character classes and Ariel Usroot's combat strategy. So let's first talk about Ariel and how he uses the elves to his personal advantage. Ariel Usroot's combat strategy is simple. He is a sword fighter, completely focused on melee combat. He doesn't care about magic, miracles, mana or skills like stealth or trap detection. He's like a quality build in Elden Ring. Zero investment in magic but compensates for weaknesses using things like fire resin, antidotes or summons. Except here, instead of the mimic tier, he uses the elves. Ariel has a very narrow view of strength as well. Pure muscle power, speed and skill with the sword. Everything else is just a tool to make him stronger. It is seen as something that has only value in relation to him. In other words, the elves are to him what buffs or healing items are to other characters. And so far, there has been no indication that these elves have any offensive spells, like lightning or fireball, or even basic attack techniques. Not to mention that they were far too intimidated by how strong, violent, hot-tempered, and unpredictable Ariel Usroot is to do anything aggressive, especially against him. In other words, even if we can't rule out that these elves might have offensive magic, everything we've seen so far suggests that their role is purely to provide buffs, support magic, and possibly utility spells, and of course scouting, and to not attack. And all of the elves have support magic that enhances physical strength, dexterity or the senses, but the kind of support magic they use differs greatly. The pink-haired elf is a ranger, similar to Aura, but of course weaker, so her magic likely focuses on sharpening senses, hers and the senses of Ariel, so that both can detect or follow things more easily. And we know from the fight between Einsolgon and Sheltier Bloodfallen that without enhanced senses, even the Overlord himself couldn't visually keep up with Sheltier's speed. So in other words, Einsolgon needed his overpowered body here. And Ariel also uses the pink-haired girl as a scout, because her senses are the sharpest among the elves, and of course they are way sharper than his. And she can navigate unfamiliar terrain as well, especially forests, because again she's a ranger by trade. Although her hearing had been somewhat impaired due to how she had been treated by the theocracy and of course by Ariel himself. Still we saw in Nazarick that she managed to detect Hermoske well before Ariel ever did. Then we have the blue-haired elf who's a cleric, and her spells are likely defensive in nature, things like increasing resistance to damage or to insta-death magic. Okay, that wouldn't be too useful against someone like Ainz due to the level difference, but against a normal Elder Lich using a death spell, it could mean the difference between life and death, and she also likely has the widest arrays of buff. I mean, if you ever played Elden Ring and a faith build in Elden Ring, you know what I mean. And she probably also has buffs that regenerate health, as well as standard healing spells, and of course, Turn Undead, a spell also used by the cleric Robert Dyke. And finally, the blonde elf is a druid, similar to Mare, just much weaker in terms of level. And druids can use buff spells like Bark Skin, which makes the skin as tough as hardwood, significantly improving resistance to any physical damage. And druids are also able to enchant normal weapons in such a way that they can hit ethereal beings, like ghosts or wraiths or specters. And again, druids can also enhance physical weapons like axes or swords in other magical ways. But again, the ability to strike something that usually can't be stricken, because they're just ectoplasma, is really important for a pure melee-based build like Ariel. And it's also quite likely that the blonde elf knows spells to protect against poison and can cure it. And she probably also has healing or poison spells as well. and I'm talking about spells like Cure Wounds, the kind also used by Crush Lulu, who is also a druid. And in Dungeons and Dragons, druids can also use spells like Fog Cloud to cover a retreat. And if you consider that Ariel Usroot's normal option to retreat from a superior enemy would simply be to make one of the elves trip, let's just say that this spell is beyond useful to him. And generally speaking, Ariel Usroot also sees all of the elves as completely expendable. Losing them is just a material loss. And since Ariel considers his team a one-man operation, he keeps all of the gold for himself, except for some shabby clothes and the occasional cold meal for the elves. And we know he likely earned several if not dozens of gold coins per job. And for this particular job, it was about 200 gold coins that was promised to him, so therefore he had more than enough cash to replace any losses. And that's pretty much how Ariel Usroot and his team, and I use the term team very loosely here, actually fights. What kind of character classes the elf girls have and how they likely fight, and what kind of spells they likely had cast on him. And with that said, now it's your turn. Let me know what you think about Ariel Usroot's team and about the elven abilities down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, and as usual, I say my special thanks to Ada Daddy Ada, ASK, Bad Girl Yee, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Lofrazer, Merowek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Q&A Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Sonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.